So welcome to When Words Collide, Street Drugs Part 2, Methamphetamine and Other Dangerous Street Drugs. Welcome, Dwayne Clayden.
Hi, thank you, Kira. All right, most of you look like you should be here. We'll give it a second for a Zoom bombing. I didn't even know that that was a thing, so I didn't have a clue what was going on, but I think we worked it out. So, again, thank you. So I'm Dwayne Clayden. My background is, well, I'm a crime writer now. Background is I was a police officer and a paramedic for over 40 years. And so the presentation I'm giving right now is really based on actual experience in the streets with overdoses and having to deal with these drugs. I need to say that I'm not a physician and I'm not a pharmacist, so I'm not presenting in that form. But I'm going to share my screen now. We'll make sure this works. Second. Here we go. Okay, so maybe I will just double check with Randy that you can see my screen. Yeah, good. All right.
You see it.
So these are my upcoming books. And so what we're talking about is street drugs. We're going to kind of talk about the other drugs. I mentioned my experience. So the other part of my experience is that before I started writing crime, I was the co-author of a book called Pre-Hospital Emergency Pharmacology. It's actually an international bestseller. It's the paramedic textbook that is used all across North America, Australia, and England as well. So it's not that I don't have a background in emergency drugs, emergency pharmacology, but to be clear, I'm not a pharmacist and I'm not a doctor, and I'm not bringing it from that perspective. So mostly we're going to talk about drugs that are called stimulants today. And so that's cocaine, also known as crack, and methamphetamine, also known as ice. So we're going to talk about cocaine first. So a lot of this is probably familiar to you if you've watched any crime dramas on TV. So common street names are Coke, C, Blow, Snow, and Flake. And what's called the base form is called freebase, but nobody calls it freebase anymore. It's really just called crack. So essentially, the same drug is referred to two different ways, as cocaine, or usually blow, actually, is the most common one, or crack. So exactly what is cocaine? Well, interestingly, cocaine is a natural substance. So there's a big chemical name for it, C17H21NO4. So I guess if you were a really good chemist, maybe you could create it. It's a stimulant drug. And so both the drugs we're going to talk about right now, cocaine and methamphetamine, are stimulant drugs. So earlier we talked about opioids, which really mellows you out, slows things down. Instead, cocaine and methamphetamine ramp things up. So on the street as coke, it's sold as a fine powder, and it can be snorted and dissolved in water and injected. Any use in Canada or the US as a recreational drug is illegal. But interestingly enough, cocaine is used in the hospital to a lesser degree now. But if you had a very, very severe nosebleed, gauze packed in cocaine could be inserted into your nostrils. And one of the things that cocaine does is it decreases the diameter of your vessels, and so thereby slows down or stops the bleeding. The other form of cocaine is crack cocaine, and it's processed into a rock form using baking soda, and often has any number of impurities. So maybe they use baking soda, maybe they use talcum powder, maybe they use a combination of baking powder and talcum powder, or throw in other things that are just a whole bunch of terrible drugs, sometimes referred to as some bath salts as well. So the term crack refers to the crackling sound it makes when you're smoking it or heating it. And the crack abuse really hit the world in the mid-1980s, and is considered an addictive drug. Cocaine was also a very kind of high-end drug considered in the 80s as well. If you were an up-and-comer, lots of young lawyers, and not to pick on anybody, but we will, lawyers and financial brokers seemed to be a drug of prestige. The other thing is it allowed you to work 18 to 20 hours a day without any sleep. So as happened in a lot of law firms or brokerage firms, it's about working the long hours. And so that helps you keep going. Crack and cocaine, the same thing, are created from the coca plant. Now, don't get that confused with the cocoa plant that you may have had your Nestle's Quick earlier today, or a hot chocolate. Oh, there we go. Oh, we're going to get to that one, Randy. That's you and I have that favorite drink in common, so we're actually going to get to that one. So very nice looking little plants. It originates not so much from the seed there, but from the coca leaves, and has been used for centuries. And a lot of it was made into teas. And you'll find that most of it comes from Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia. And so coca leaf infusions or teas were used to combat altitude sickness, interestingly enough, and of course boost the energy in many native tribes in South America. And the side effect to that was it also increased productivity. So it is a huge importation issue. It's a huge money maker, and I'm sure if you're tuning into this that you have heard or seen of the Colombian, Peruvian cartels and about moving the product. So this is from earlier this year. I think it was February. The USS Pinckney seized more than 120 kilograms of cocaine. It says suspected there, but it turned out to be cocaine. And it was worth $4.5 million. There's a belief that that seizure may have been 1% of the cocaine that was being shipped in and around that particular time. So the interdiction by the U.S. Coast Guard, by drug enforcement agencies, by all border services, it's negligible. As far as the cartels are concerned, that $4.5 million is worth it to be seized if that means they're not looking in another area where the other 99% is passing through. There's a number of ways they do it. Sometimes it's in a container ship. One of the favorite methods is a very low-flying plane. But usually a very low-flying but fast plane, like a Learjet, and skims over the water. They open the hatch and they toss out these bags that float. And the cartels have any number of fishing vessels out there searching around, and they go in, they pull these waterproof bags of cocaine into the fishing ship, and off they go to a port that's not a common port. And that's how a lot of the importation happens. I really thought in the 80s, for those who remember this, I really thought in the 80s that these guys had cocaine under control and then there wasn't going to be any more importation, but apparently I was wrong on that one. So here's for Randy and I. It is true that in the original version of Coca-Cola, there was cocaine. And this is back of a bottle, well, actually more of a tincture bottle, if you know what I mean, the dark colored container. And this says that there was 3 drams of extract of coca, and that works out to anywhere. Actually, my math is wrong there. See, that's not 33 bad ice. Anyway, the 3 drams works out to 1.09, so give or take a little over 1 milligram of cocaine, which would be an equivalent amount of what you would snort in any given dose. So apparently our great-grandparents, if they were drinking Coke, their productivity was probably pretty good. They could work the long hours, the 10 to 14 hours that they were working then. And the other interesting thing is that the same mixture was also found in cough medicine. So that was good. Take some cough medicine before you went to work and you were feeling mighty fine. So here we're saying, crack versus cocaine, but as I mentioned, it's the same thing. It's just, well, dare I say, Pepsi versus Coke sort of thing. Anyway, they're two of the same thing, but this is the difference in what they look like. So on the left is the crack cocaine, the rock cocaine, the crack, and on the right is obviously the powdered version that is generally divided up and snorted somehow, whereas the rock cocaine is smoked. So the methods of cocaine abuse, as just mentioned, is snorting up the nose, smoking it. It can also be dissolved in water and injected, although that's not as common. And you can rub it into the mucous membranes. And fun, you can also use it as a suppository. So for those who are saying, why a suppository? Most medications are rapidly absorbed in moist tissue, such as the mucosa in your mouth, but also at the other end of the spectrum. Those who might remember really early TV, even before Miami Vice, there was a guy named Kojak. And he used to, they'd stop a drug dealer, they'd pull out the package of whatever it was, he'd slice it open with his knife, he'd lick his finger, he'd stick his finger into the cocaine or whatever it was, and then rub it on his gum. The idea is that if it was cocaine or if it was an opioid, it would numb the area. So that became known in police circles as the Kojak test. It was also known as the fatality test because if you got too much on there or the stuff was too pure, it would absolutely kill you. So no self-respecting police officer into the 70s and 80s would do that. But it was something to laugh about as wondering if the new detective on the street was going to have the Kojak test on some new drugs. So here's what's referred to as cocaine lines, and so this is the most common way, snorted in lines. And again, if you watched it, some of the movies portrayed the financial wizards, and they'd have a line of coke going on, usually on a mirror. I'm not sure why on a mirror, whether it's because then you could see yourself snorting the coke or what, but for some reason, the razor blade, the lines, and a mirror were common. And then you couldn't have it without a dollar bill either, so you rolled up the dollar bill to ensure you could snort it appropriately. So smoking crack, injecting coke. So as mentioned, smoking crack, it makes that noise when you smoke, the crackling sound. It has a more intense and immediate effect, but the high lasts not as long. So the high from snorting the cocaine could last for hours, and that's what kept the late workers well into the night working. Crack is less. It may be as little as 5 to 10 minutes. And then there's also an intense crash afterwards. So it's the high payoff, high crash afterwards. So it spikes, where's my hand here, spikes quickly and then drops off quickly, whereas snorting it is more a level playing field, a level line. And as I mentioned, the other way of doing it is by injection. It's really not that popular, but for example, a heroin addict who's used to injecting medications can't get heroin, then may switch over to crack cocaine, which kind of doesn't make sense because the drugs are doing opposite things. But as I mentioned in the earlier talk too, that because a person takes one drug doesn't mean they aren't taking 2 or 3 or 4 others. So there's also this rebound of, you could take the opioid, which will drop you down a little bit, and then when you need to perk back up, you take the cocaine. So you're bouncing off the drugs, you use the opioid when you need to relax a little bit, you use the cocaine when you need to back up again. So the heaven of it is really just a euphoric feeling, exhilaration, hyperactivity, self-confidence goes through the roof, and just a heightened awareness and boundless energy. And so the rush of snorting, whereas with the crack, the effect is almost immediate and lasts 5 to 10 minutes. The rush from snorting it takes 5 to 10 minutes before it takes effect and then hits like gangbusters. So you really feel superhuman, that you can accomplish anything. And that's in anything, whether at work, it was a drug that was used in sports. So it was truly, a big performance enhancing drug. The hell of it was they experienced headaches and tremors, and then apprehension and insomnia. So even after snorting it, where the effect may last hours, there's still the crash that comes afterwards. So like the other drugs I've mentioned, repeated doses are necessary. So you'll hit that high, you'll hit that low, and then after a period of time, the highs aren't as high and the lows are lower. So you start increasing the doses just to be able to get the same high, the same feel that you become used to. And that's really the way it is with all drugs. The hell of it is that larger doses may lead to teeth grinding, and so much so that that some will get appliances to wear at night because they'll grind their teeth at night. Compulsive acts such as scratching, so an itch will be something that they really go after, or other kind of compulsive behaviors like finger tapping or clicking of a pen. Those sorts of things become prominent. They also suffer paranoia. So if they're in that environment, a competitive environment like a law firm or the brokerage house, they're hyper competitive, they're hyper confident, and they're extremely paranoid about the other person because they know the other person is doing exactly the same thing and there's this big competition going on. So the paranoia, the anxiety, and then it can lead to, in further stages, irrational ideas and aggression. Let me see. Yeah, so with the increased energy, as I said, there's the increased fatigue, but there is, or reduced fatigue and heightened mental awareness. They may be talkative, extroverted, have a loss of appetite, and decreased need for sleep. Now, eventually, all of this is going to catch up to them. And the pleasurable effects are continued as long as you keep administering it. And as soon as you start interrupting that cycle, then the other effects are going to come in, the headaches and the absolute fatigue and a big crash. As I mentioned earlier, with using it for a nosebleed, so one of the big physical effects is constricted blood vessels, dilated pupils. So if you listen to the previous talk on opioids, I mentioned that with opioids you have very pinpoint pupils. So the opposite effect in these, so that makes sense. With the opioids, the pupils constrict. With the cocaine and the active nature of it, the pupils are dilated. And there's increased temperature, increased heart rate, and increased blood pressure. So it's probably no surprise to anybody that one of the major side effects or effects of cocaine is cardiovascular disease. And so that can come in form of what's called vasospasm. So that's where the arteries actually go into spasm, and that'll decrease circulation. It can also lead to clot formation, thrombosis, and it can also lead to arrhythmias. And so arrhythmia is a difference in your heart rhythm. So a normal sinus rhythm is where hopefully we all are, 72 to give or take 100 beats a minute. If you're a finely tuned athlete like Randy and I, our heart rates are probably like in the 40 to 60 range until we have our new Coke. But what we'll be seeing with the arrhythmias is rapid heart rates. So heart rates that are in the 140s, the 150s, the 160s. And then that will bring chest pain along with it. So it's not unusual for somebody who's taking a lot of Coke to end up with chest pain. As a paramedic, we would go to those. And, over the years, you see lots of things. And you get a little suspicious about things. And one of the things that always made me suspicious was when a 24-year-old had chest pain. Not saying it can't happen, not saying it's not possible, but it's not very high on the list. So somebody told me that they were 24 years old, they were dressed in a nice suit and had a heart rate of 160 or 170. My first thought, it's not that they weren't having chest pain, but what was the cause? And the cause was probably something to do with cocaine. And we really did see that a lot in the 80s, mid-80s to late 80s into the 90s. So as I mentioned, the health hazards, disturbances in the heart rhythm, and so that's not good. The headaches, and so the headaches are from the rapid heart rate as well. So the vessels have now constricted and are literally throbbing in your head. It can lead to respiratory failure because of the increased blood pressure, increased heart rate. That can lead to strokes. Also stomach pain and nausea. And as I said, heart attacks and then also seizures as well. The long-term effects will again make sense. So permanent damage to the blood vessels, the heart, of the brain. High blood pressure that now stays. So now you're 28 years old, 30 years old, and you have a high blood pressure of a 70-year-old or an 80-year-old. You have a heart of a 70 or 80-year-old. The vessels aren't working. It can lead to liver, kidney, and lung damage, hallucinations, sexual problems, including reproductive damage, infertility, and then severe depression as well. The cocaine is, as most drugs are chemicals of some sort. They either come from nature or as a mineral from animals, or we've created it synthetically. But what those chemicals are all caustic, and especially to the nose. So repeated use of cocaine will wear down and thin the skin inside the nose, the tissue inside the nose. And so while initially maybe the cocaine would stop a nosebleed, now repeated use will have thinned the tissue so much that it actually causes nosebleeds. You've also probably seen portrayed on TV the person who is using coke lots, kind of rubbing their nose, which you can't do anymore, by the way, and sniffling. And so that's the runny nose that comes as a side effect of the cocaine. Ingesting it can actually essentially kill your bowel. So it just poisons your bowel to the point the tissue in the bowels will die. And then you can get gangrene and die from that. Also, and that's because of reduced blood flow to the area. And then injecting the drug has all the problems that injecting any drugs, whereas heroin or anything else, if the needle is dirty, there's the risk for contracting HIV, viral hepatitis, and other bloodborne diseases. And the long-term use, leads to tolerance. So as I said, if you start out, a small dose might do you well for a while, and then you need more and more because as your tolerance increases, you need more. And that can lead to really high doses, which then will absolutely start affecting your cardiovascular system. And because it decreases your appetite, many chronic users are malnourished, look very thin, start to look gaunt. And then if it's used in a binge fashion, again, it has those highs and lows. And so you become, over the period of time, become panicky. And like I said, you're really scared of everybody around you. You're wondering what's going on, who's talking about you, what are they talking about over there at the water cooler, what are they doing at the next office, standing in line at Starbucks for a coffee, and people are talking behind you, and you're sure that they're talking about me. I know they're talking about me. What are they talking about? So that sort of thing. And then the conversation they actually hear in their head isn't even the conversation that's happening behind them, but it's what they're hearing. It's what they're believing is happening. This is just CT scans of brains in action. So the comparison subject is normal person not taking any drugs. So you can see the areas of red is intense action, areas of yellow, action happening. And then with 1 week, a cocaine user has taken away a lot of the function in the frontal part of the brain. And then after 3 months, the abuser is pretty much chronic, and there's no coming back from that. Now, the other interesting thing, if you remember the slide at the beginning about using the dollar bill to snort the cocaine. So the interesting thing is cocaine is found in probably almost every piece of currency that is carried. So they looked at a number of bills. I don't know how many bills they looked at, but 80% of the bills they looked at in Toronto had traces of cocaine, 77% in Salt Lake City, which I found quite interesting, 75% in Brasilia, 20% in Tokyo and Beijing, and then 0% in, I will say it wrong, so I won't even pronounce the name, in China. Now, it's not enough to cause any health risks, and it's not saying either that that's the contamination of the bills has only come from snorting the cocaine used in the rolled up bill, because hundreds of millions of dollars every year is passed back and forth with the drug dealers. So If their hands are contaminated, they pass that on. The person who's buying it, their hands are contaminated. There's so many places that the drugs or the bills can be contaminated. So that's a bit of an issue. Here's what happens when you use some drugs: cocaine, alcohol, crack, or Pokemon Go. I know this is a bit of a dated slide, but it's still funny to me. And that's the hard part about doing presentations like this. I have no clue if anybody is laughing at this, but I'm sure you are. All right, so we're going to change this a little bit. So one does not simply watch one episode of Breaking Bad. So you know where we're going. We're going to talk about these guys. And when I took chemistry in high school, it was not this interesting or exciting. And I think I would have paid a lot more attention had I known. All right, so we're going to talk about methamphetamine. So it as well is powerful and highly addictive stimulant, and it affects the central nervous system. And often called crystal meth, as you can see in the picture, because of the way it looks. It looks like these shiny glass fragments. And if I remember right, in Breaking Bad, Walter was famous because of the blue tint that he was able to get into his methamphetamine. So that set him apart. So methamphetamine is chemically similar to a drug called amphetamine. Amphetamine was particularly popular in probably into the 50s into the 60s by long-distance truck drivers. And so they would take amphetamine so they could do the long-distance 18, 24, 36 hours trucking without having to stop. Before there were stringent rules about how many hours truckers could go and that sort of thing. So the idea was you pop a few of these and you could keep going. It also did have its medical uses for ADHD and narcolepsy, but better drugs were created, better drugs were found. So the heaven of crystal meth is that there's an intense wave right away, and the effects can last from 4 to 14 hours. The hell of it is the rebounds. Now, I'm not backing this up by any research. My belief is that methamphetamine is the most addictive of the drugs. It is the hardest one to recover from, and is pretty much the fastest route to death from an overdose. So that would be based on experience on the street, and it wouldn't be unusual to see somebody go from their first dose of methamphetamine to dead 6 months later. And they would go from being 5'10", 170 pounds. Interestingly enough, they were still 5'10". 6 months later, maybe a little less, but they would weigh 90 pounds. And so during that time, they had lost half their body weight in 6 months. The pictures you showed of the gaunt faces, the haunted looks, just defeated, and they literally live from one dose to the next. That is their only reason for living, is to get to the next dose. That's it. That becomes their whole sole reason for living. That becomes their life. And so the hell of it is the intense feelings of anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, the fatigue that they get, and definitely psychosis. So as bad as the psychosis may have been with cocaine, meth addicts are way more psychotic, and they will do absolutely anything to get their next fix. And that is the dangerous part, is they will kill, they will rob, they will do absolutely anything to get that next fix. The drive is so overpowering. So how do they use it? So you can smoke meth. You can swallow it in a pill. That would be more the amphetamine side of things, not the methamphetamine, but it can be made into a pill. They'll start it. They also inject it and dissolve it in water or alcohol. Smoking still is probably the most popular. And so that's why, they found creative ways to do this. So they can take a pop can, a pop bottle, a rolled up piece of plastic. They find all sorts of ways that they can smoke this. And it may not be like I'm saying cigarette smoke, but what they want is the vapors. They want the fumes to be able to inhale that. The short-term effects are they're absolutely awake, ready for physical activity, decreased appetite. I think I probably mention this later, but amphetamines were also used as a diet pill because it suppresses your desire to eat. faster breathing. So like cocaine, it's a stimulant. So faster breathing, rapid and irregular heartbeats aren't uncommon, and increased blood pressure and body temperature. So methamphetamine is not natural. You can't go out and find methamphetamine tree or bush or plant anywhere. It's chemically made and made out of some household ingredients. There's a couple of different stories about methamphetamine. Hard to differentiate which ones might be true, but it was created by the Germans in the 1890s. And then in First World War, the Germans played around with it a little bit, and then in 1919, Japan made it stronger, and they used it to keep soldiers awake. And there's a belief that early in the Second World War, that Germany was giving it to their soldiers, and the soldiers were awake so long they were giving them high doses, and the soldiers were psychotic, they were crazed, and they would charge right into gunfire, and it so scared some of the Allied forces that they backed away, thinking that the Germans were possessed and seemingly invincible, because the Germans would get peppered with bullets and wouldn't immediately fall to the ground. They certainly did suffer from the wounds, but it was like they didn't even know they were being hit, and they continued on. And worse than the Scottish bagpipes, that scared the guys in the war, the soldiers in the war. As I mentioned, in the 1950s, it was used as a diet drug and an antidepressant drug. And then in 1970, it was declared illegal in Canada and the US and other parts of the world, simply because there were no medical benefits to it. Kind of amazing that it took, whatever that is, 80 years to figure out that this drug had no medical benefits, and maybe we should get rid of it. So we're in a period of time where COVID gets blamed on everything. So I actually saw this as a joke on Facebook, but I just recreated it. So 3 die from COVID-19 in a meth lab fire. So everybody has to know that's tongue-in-cheek. However, that fire is very real. So if you watch Breaking Bad, you know that meth is cooked. You know that meth has a chemical process that requires heat. And sometimes for police and the fire department, the first EMS, the first sign of a meth lab is arriving on the scene to something like this. And we arrive on scene and kind of look at each other on either side and go, meth lab? And everybody, yeah. And it wasn't unusual to find 3 or 4 or 6 guys standing off to the side looking really, really sad because their lab had gone up, but they didn't even have the awareness to think maybe we shouldn't stand around and watch this fire that was caused by our meth lab. So this is one example. Meth is in garages. It's not necessarily in neighborhoods. Cooked in garages in very nice neighborhoods. I spent parts of 5 years as a paramedic with the tactical team, and so we did lots of raids on places. And actually, most of the raids we did, not just for this, but for any drugs, was in the newer neighborhoods. Really nice houses that then had to be torn down because they were a marijuana grow-op, or a meth lab was there and all the chemicals were in the house, and they had to be destroyed afterwards. So having a methamphetamine, it leads to alertness, energy, confidence, heightened sense of sexuality and euphoria. And as I mentioned, the hell of it is aggression and violence, because they've got to get the next fix. Psychotic behavior, they care about no one and nothing. Memory loss, then heart and brain damage, and as I said, that can happen within a month. I've seen some reports that have said that methamphetamine is 80 to 85% addictive on the very first dose. So that's higher than anything else I know. And coming back from this, I think I mentioned in the previous session, but addiction centers maybe 1 to 2% for a period of time will be able to cure this addiction. So to me, from what I've seen, again, like I said, on the street, this is just the worst of the worst. And that's not taking any away from the opioid crisis and how bad it is. They're all bad, but this is just a crazy drug, just an absolutely crazy drug. And this is just another, as I mentioned, the metamorphosis, the change in somebody in literally a few months. Physical changes are incredible. Just check here. Checking on time. Okay. So the other thing we've talked about, the weight loss, the psychosis. They also have dental problems. So there's the missing teeth. They'll have gum problems. The teeth will fall out, violent behavior. The other thing is known as meth bugs. And that's where they feel like bugs are crawling over them all the time. And so they will start scratching. And they will literally rip their arms wide open as deep as possible to try and get at the meth drug, or at the bugs that they think are there. They're not there, but they think they're there. And as I mentioned, extremely addictive and very toxic. It's just some of the worst chemicals going. And then the long-term effects, I think I already mentioned this. So liver damage, no, I guess that was the other one. I mean, kind of the same. Liver damage, kidney damage, infectious diseases is even bigger in this group. Depression, and the brain damage is worse than in cocaine. So we're going to switch topics a little bit and just talk about some of the date rape drugs. So there's three primary date rape: rohypnol, GHB, and ketamine. And see kind of examples on the side there. And the attacker can use all sorts of different ways to make this happen. So GHB as a liquid is, I don't want to say the best way, I suppose effective way, because if poured into a drink, it's immediately, oops, sorry, can you still hear me? We're good? Okay. It's immediately going to have an effect because it'll just mix with the drink. Whereas rohypnol, if it's as a pill, it's going to need to dissolve, which takes a little time. Ketamine as a powder takes a bit less time. However, the three drugs can be found in any of the forms. So it can be found as a pill, it can be found as a liquid, it can be made into a liquid already, and can be found in powder form. GHB, I'm not even going to work on the long name there. So it's a depressant, and it has many nicknames, none of them very nice. Easy Lay, Georgia Homeboy, Liquid X, Liquid Ecstasy, Liquid E, Grievous Bodily Harm. You can see all the names there. Oops, sorry, go back. And so on the right, you can see the picture. So this is set up to be GHB as a liquid, but again, it could be any of the drugs in liquid format, fairly easily put into an alcohol glass. You don't need a lot of it, easily, palmed in your hand, easy to keep in a pocket. And none of those, I'm not saying any of those are good things, so I'm certainly not. That's why it's an issue. Rohypnol, it's a strong benzodiazepine. So a benzodiazepine is a tranquilizer. And the big ones are known as Mexican Valium circles, or rookies. And Roche is ironically because of the company that makes it. And it's also known as the forget-me pill, which is not good. It's not legally available in the United States or Canada. In other countries, doctors sometimes use it as an anesthesia before surgery. So really in North America, it is just a plain illegal drug that shouldn't be around. The challenge, as with the cocaine and the other drugs, is really there is just a pipeline into the US and Canada for these drugs, and it's hard to stop. Ketamine is a dissociative drug that makes you feel detached. So if you've ever had kidney stones, you may have been given ketamine because it's really good for the pain for kidney stones. If you really have severe migraines, you may have been given it for severe migraine too. So it does have its uses, but generally speaking, where we got ketamine from is it was a pet anesthetic. So that's where the name cat Valium came from, because it sounds better, I think, than dog Valium. But same idea. It's also known as vitamin K. And so this dissociative drug means it separates you from reality. You don't know what's going on, and are open to suggestions.
10 minutes.
One,
Sorry,
okay,
10 minutes.
thank you. Um, and the one that's kind of forgotten, I suppose, a little bit in the conversation, but needs to be there, is alcohol. And so, alcohol inhibits people. It can prevent you from defending yourself, prevent you knowing what's going on around, or remembering it later. So, it's probably one of the first date rape drug. But you take alcohol and combine it with either of the other three, and now you really have a terribly potent concoction. And so that's where the danger comes in. And I was shaking my head, because sometimes I just shake my head and I think the ingenuity of bad guys, if they just put that effort to good, what we could accomplish. So the GHB makes you sleepy, forgetful, or weak. It can also cause seizures. The effect lasts from 15 to 30 minutes. Rohypnol relaxes you. In high doses, it can cause trouble controlling your muscles. So you become limp, ragdoll, maybe amnesia, but definitely loss of inhibition. So this is where the predator, could use the line, "Oh, my girlfriend drank too much," as he's helping her out. So that's how limp, that's how flaccid the person could become. Depending on the dose, it can be as little as 30 minutes to 2 hours. Ketamine might make you hallucinate and make you feel woozy. It also has kind of an out-of-body experience, so that's the dissociative part. And that can happen with opioids too. So morphine, the opioids, if you really do have pain and you're being treated for pain, the drugs doesn't necessarily get rid of the pain. It just makes it so you don't care that you have pain. That's the dissociative effect. So the same with ketamine is, you might know something's going on or something's wrong, but you don't care. And it's like you're watching it from over here, somewhere other than where you are. But it can cause high blood pressure, change your heart rate. You can have seizures or coma from it as well. And there's the hangover effect. That effect could last for a day or more. And then alcohol, may make you relaxed, chatty, and confident. As you drink more, your emotions become unstable, you lose control. Add any of those drugs into this, and the predator has set up the victim. So this is just quick review here. Rohypnol, it can take effect as soon as 20 minutes and last 8 to 12 hours. GHB, 15 minutes, 3 to 6 hours, and ketamine, very quick onset, but doesn't last as long. And so if at any point you should find yourself in this situation where things just aren't making sense, right away you need to seek help. And contrary to what you see in movies and TV, or at least certainly in Canada, bartenders don't tend to drink. They don't tend to be drunk. They actually do tend to be people that you can count on. And as a police officer, when I went into a bar, or as a paramedic, when I went into a bar and I needed a hand, the people I turned to were the bartenders, because they were generally the only other sober people in the room, but they were very reliable. And some of them were very, very big. And that played to my benefit as well, having a kind of backup. So, the point is, seek help right away. So how do you avoid this? Well, first off, pour your own whenever possible. Don't ever accept a drink that's already open for you. Send it back and say, no, put it here, or open it right in front of me. Don't accept drinks from other people. Keep control of your drinks at all times. So, one of the things you can do is taking your cup and having your hand over it, the top, at all times. And that way you know where it is. And if you set it down, your hand still stays there with your drink. Carry it, even if you have to take it to the bathroom, as unsanitary as that might sound, or finish it before you go to the bathroom. Don't drink anything that tastes strange. And as soon as you feel like something tastes strange, then you need to talk to somebody about it. And if you're feeling any weird sensation, especially that dissociative where you're not sure where you are, or things are happening around you but you're watching it, then definitely get some help. But some brilliant people are working on this. So anti-date straw that will change, invented in Israel, that will change color, if these drugs are present, and then also glasses that will also show in different colored stripes or different colored patterns on a glass if the drug's available. And so, like the last presentation, I'll end on something a little bit happier. I think the girl's happy, the cat not so much, but I think the cat's going to have a pretty good life with that little girl. I know my dog is absolutely spoiled here, so. So that's the presentation. My books, these are mine that are coming out. Speargrass actually released today as an ebook. And if you want to get a hold of me, ask any further questions, by all means, get a hold of me. I love to talk about this stuff and answer questions. And I'm going to stop sharing. I think we got a couple minutes left here.
So
And
questions.
yeah, here, do we have any
Okay,
questions over there? I'm just taking a quick look now.
Crack and cocaine, is there a difference in the addiction possibilities?
No, I don't think there is in that. It's like I said, it's essentially the same drug in different format. So with the crack and the cocaine, it's a longer term use, so you're not as likely to get addicted right away, but you certainly will over time. And yeah, I think that was just a 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's bad versus bad on that one.
How far back in history have the date rape drugs been in the picture?
Oh, that's a really good question, and that's something I didn't look up, but I should. Well, you know what? If we use alcohol as one of them, then this is the beginning of fermentation, possibly. I'm just trying to think when I first started seeing. I would say it was the late '90s into the 2000s when, as a paramedic, we first started seeing that, and then became really prevalent mid 2000 into 2010, 11. Now, but that's a great question. I'm going to go back and look that up. I hadn't thought of that, but I haven't heard as much about it lately. So I'm not sure if some of the other methods, the education was a big thing. I know for a long time, education in the bars was a really big thing, and I think that made a difference. But yeah, I will look that up, and I'm going to find the answer. And if Randy's okay with that, I will post that onto the When Words Collide website when I find some answers on that. That's okay.
Okay, and
That's a great question.
Do all of these drugs cross the blood-brain barrier?
Holy smoke! There's a test question. Yes, of the ones we've talked about today, yes, they all do. So they all affect the brain somewhat. I'm glad you didn't ask about the placental barrier because that question I couldn't answer off the top of my head. But all of these drugs and the opiates we talked about earlier do cross the blood-brain barrier, so we'll have some effect on level of consciousness and directly on the brain.
With all of these drugs being so bad, why do people begin taking them?
That's the age-old question, isn't it? Some of it's pure pressure. Of the people I've talked to who are addicts, I mean, I worked downtown for a long time, and you get to know some of the addicts and the homeless people, and you find out their stories, and certainly none of them intended to be where they were. It was like a once-off thing. I'm gonna have a couple drinks, no big deal. I'm smoking some marijuana with my buddies, no big deal. You're at a party and the guy says, "Hey, try this Coke, it's no big deal." And so you snort a line or two and you go, "Hey, that feels pretty good. I kind of enjoy that feeling." And I think that's where it comes from. I mentioned more so in the last presentation, as humans, we seek pleasure. And we find something that gives us pleasures. Sometimes it's hard to back away from that. And cocaine is pretty powerful, from what I understand. I haven't used it at all myself, but in talking to the addicts and listening to them, it's not just, oh, I felt a little bit better. It was like, holy crap, did I feel better? Did I have more energy? And as I mentioned, and I picked on the lawyers and the finance guys who are working, ladies who are working, 12 to 18 hours a day to get to that $1 million salary to become a partner in the law firm. Like, if this is what's going to get me there, I'll just stop. Once I get there, I'm going to stop. But with all addicts, you reach that point where there isn't a stop anymore. You've crossed the line, but you don't know where that is. And for me, it's one step over the line. For somebody, it's a couple of steps. Oh, I think my battery's dying. Uh, the line is different for everybody, and that's the only thing I can almost say for sure is if you take methamphetamine, you're freaking doomed. You're not coming back. You're just not going to come back without. The odds are not in your favor, and it is horrible. Watching that process happen is absolutely horrible. So I'll finish up here. Anybody has any questions, by all means, email me. I love answering the questions, and thanks, Kira, for hosting this. Wonderful job. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Great presentation.
All right, thanks.